A lot of characters in Fire Emblem live hard, painful and difficult lives. Hardships are very common, and the amount of characters who haven't had to mourn a loved one can be counted on one hand. However, despite the horrors of war being a core theme of the series' identity, usually the endings are good. Most playable characters end the story in a better place than they started it. They've found love, they've now got a sense of belonging, or they are at least freed from the shackles that restrained them before. But one character jumps out as someone who just can't catch a break. Princess Nyna of Archanea, important NPC in Shadow Dragon and damsel in distress and late recruit in Mystery of the Emblem. Her entire life, from start to finish, is just tragic. She starts the story as a tragic character with a life you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy, and she ends it with one. And the worst part of all of it isn't even her fault. Nyna is the most painfully tragic character in Fire Emblem history. Since I'd wager the Archanea games are probably among the lesser played Fire Emblem games among you watching, I feel like I need to give you some background here. Nyna is the princess of the Holy Kingdom of Archanea, not to be confused with the continent of the same name. Nyna's Archanea is one of the 7 kingdoms on this continent, but it is the largest and the most powerful, and as such Nyna holds tremendous political power. However, that doesn't mean that she's a powerful person whatsoever. She's a pawn. A political pawn that throughout the entire Archanea saga may be kept alive as a result, but throughout nearly every moment, life is essentially living her, happening around her while she is forced to go with it or suffer the consequences. We see this ourselves in the first episode of the Archanea saga, the capital falls. This capital is the palace of Archanea, where Nyna resides with her family. It falls under attack by Dol's forces, led by Garneth under orders of Medeus, and they make short work of the defending forces led by Meloa. The royal family goes into hiding in their castle, but as the enemy soldiers come closer, the king of Archanea, Nyna's father, makes an important decision. Advisor Boa is to take his daughter and a group of knights and flee, while the rest of her family stay behind. They are ambushed however by Doral General Gauber, who puts them on the ropes until another high-ranking commander arrives, Camus, leader of the Sable Order and someone who would prove very important to Nyna's story. Unlike Gauber, who was planning to kill them, Camus negotiates for the peaceful surrender of Nyna and her group, promising that he will lead the occupation alongside Nyna to ensure her people won't be hurt. His entire sequence shows right from the get-go what kind of person Nyna is. Not only is the safety of her people of tremendous importance to her, she is even willing to put herself to the blade to save individuals she cares for, as shown when Camus nearly kills her retainer Midia. She is shown to care for Boa, shows disgust for Camus for his past actions, refuses to leave her family. It is beyond evident that Nyna is someone who deeply cares for others and wants nothing but peace and prosperity, to the point she even criticizes her own father's political decisions on the day he dies. It is this day that defines Nyna's life from now on. Not only is she the leading royal of Archanea now, she has also just met the man who would be a sole glimmer of hope in Nyna's new dark life. The way she speaks of this day to Marv later, recalling the images of her father and mother hung before the gates as an example, shows it tremendously affected her. But in her own words, she feels as if she should cry or scream, but the tears just don't come. For 2 years, Nyna and Camus look after Archanea together. While we don't have many details on how that went, it is clear from the way Camus and Nyna speak now that they enjoyed their time together, and that Nyna's rule over Archanea has been a success, with the people calling her the White Rose of the land. But that all changes when Medeus demands Nyna be brought to Doral. When Camus hears this, he defects from Doral's army and instead leads Nyna away towards the neighboring kingdom of Aurelis, which is depicted in the Archanea saga chapter The Beginning. Here we see once again how selfless Nyna is, with Camus now added to the list of people she would die for. He talks her out of that, however, saying her loyalty to her people is more important than what will happen to him, to which Nyna agrees. But once again, it shows how little control Nyna has over everything around her. Her parents are killed during an invasion, she may remain as reigning royal, but only alongside the man responsible for their deaths, and just when she's growing into the role, she's forced to abandon her kingdom, and the man she has come to care for will pay the price. Nyna is successfully escorted from Archanea to Aurelis under supervision of the Sable Knights, but it does lead to Camus being separated from her side. He is captured by Medeus' forces and imprisoned, being barely kept alive. Nyna, on the other hand, now has a new protector, and his name is Prince Hardin of Aurelis. He and his brother, the king, are struggling with the occupation of Macedon at the time, but the tides turn when Marv and his army arrive and they reclaim the land of Aurelis. At the end of this battle is when Nyna finally makes something of a decision of her own agency, even if it is one that falls very much in line with her duty rather than a personal decision. She officially declares Marv as commander of the Resistance army and hands him the Fire Emblem, a symbol of great importance to her home of Archanea that has been in her family ever since the War of Liberation. The next destination of the Liberation Army, now dubbed Archanean League, is her home, Archanea, where 3 years after the initial occupation of Dorl, the enemy is driven away. Finally, Nyna is the true ruler of her nation she had so far never been. For her mental health, it would probably have been better at this point if she had stayed in Archanea and looked after her kingdom, but that is not what she does, instead remaining at the side of the Archanean League, traveling the continent. And that eventually leads her to Grust, the home of Camus. It is at this point that Nyna comes clean with Marv. She tells him about her history with Camus, and even though she can't get the exact words out of her mouth, it is clear she deeply cares for him and hopes that Marv can persuade Camus, who returned to the battlefield following his imprisonment. But when they meet again, Camus remains loyal to his king, even if, as he puts it, his heart actually wants something else. Camus is not a mandatory enemy to defeat in this chapter, which means that he doesn't canonically die, but if you do defeat him, Nyna will grieve him deeply, a further wound in her already broken heart. And it's at this point she tells Marv something quite important. It's essentially the perfect twisted knife into the tragic tale of Nyna. Because so far, she has certainly been lacking in agency, and none of the horrible things that befall her are even remotely her fault, but it's like the game wants to pile up that misery even further. Introducing the Curse of the Fire Emblem. All the way back when the shield was first entrusted onto the legendary hero Henry by the princess of the time, Artemis, it was a symbol of not just the end of the war and the defeat of Medeus, but also the end of their love. Henry and Artemis were in love, and the war tore them apart, making the Fire Emblem not just a symbol of hope to the princess that stayed behind, but also one to hate. And so, Artemis cursed the Fire Emblem, with the next person to give it out to a legendary hero forced to suffer the same hardships she did. And that person, that is Nyna. Not only is she suffering the effects of war, she is also literally cursed, forced to suffer heartbreak times 11, all because of the wrath of her own ancestor. It is unbelievably tragic and incredibly undeserved, all for a character who simply wanted to be a good person and is shown to deeply care for others. With Camus out of the picture, Nyna grieves during a period that is supposed to be celebratory and climactic. Marv, Hardin and the rest of the Archanean League succeed in defeating Medeus and Dorl, ending the war. Finally, an end to the curse, an end to the horrors that these 3 years have been. Finally, Nyna can have some agency in her life and rule the kingdom she vowed to protect. But no. Her own advisor Boa firmly believes Archanea should have a king, that a woman cannot rule alone, and so insists she marries one of the 2 most powerful men on the continent, heroes of the War of Shadows, Marv of Altea or Hardin of Aurelis. In every sense of the word, Marv would make the most sense. He is a legendary hero, he and Nyna have a good bond, and while there is no love there, royal relationships have been founded on less. But Nyna knows. Nyna knows Shida and Marv are in love, and so once again chooses the happiness of another over her own. Instead, she marries Hardin, king of Aurelis, a fine man, good fighter, but not someone she loves. Her heart was still with Camus. Hardin, on the other hand, does have feelings for Nyna, resulting in a painful, strained relationship that drives Hardin to depression, which Garnev uses to fuel the Dark Sphere and corrupt his soul. Within no time at all, Hardin goes from an ally of Marv's and unrequited lover of Nyna to a grueling tyrant, who sweeps the continent into a war again and hands Nyna to Garnev to resurrect Medeus like she's nothing. Call it a curse, call it bad luck, but man, Nyna just can't catch a break. Had she just ignored Boa, had she not been such a kind soul who wished the best for Shida and Marv, none of this would have happened. And that's not me putting the blame on Nyna, that's me showing how much guilt Nyna must have felt, once again becoming entangled in war and destruction through little to no fault of her own. While Nyna is imprisoned alongside Marv's sister Elise and Maria and Lena of Macedon and hypnotized into serving Medeius, Marv once again travels the continent to wage a war for good. Among his ranks is a mysterious masked man known as Sirius. His true identity is that of Zeke, and Zeke's true identity is that of Camus. Big shock. Canonically, he survived the last war and ended up in the nearby continent of Valentia, where he initially lived without his memories in the care of a priest known as Tatiana. Here he once again follows the order of a twisted group of generals, but this time only because his love Tatiana is imprisoned. It is a parallel to Shadow Dragon that definitely stinks from Nina's perspective, so maybe it's for the best she doesn't know about it. Yet. Because as Marv's journey continues, he ends up facing Medeius once more at the dragon's altar. This is also where the 4 noble women are held, ready for the sacrifice, and here 2 different endings can play out, both, well, let's just say they fit how Nina's story has been going so far. By talking to the 4 women using a character close to their heart, you can break their spell and recruit them before it's too late. For Nyna, this character is obviously Sirius, but say you don't bring Sirius along, what happens then? Well, in that case, Nyna is eaten by Medeius to heal himself. That's it. That's the end of her life then. No happy ever after, no reunion, no redemption, eaten by a dragon while under mind control. Her final memories being that she made her husband so depressed he became a warmongering tyrant. That's rough, very rough. So let's avoid that. Let's bring Sirius along and have him talk to Nyna. She instantly recognizes him, seeing through his new persona with glee, as she finally finds out the man she still longs for is still alive. Finally, a happy ending. Is what it would have been if Sirius didn't speak the painful words, "I must leave soon." And when Nyna asks why, he says he must go back to his country where someone is waiting for him, this someone being Tatiana, of course. The curse strikes again. Just when it seemed she'd be reunited with her long-lost love, she is forced to find out that even though that love was once mutual and still alive, it is not to be. Camus' heart already belongs to someone else, creating a painful parallel to Nina's own situation with Hardin. And while I'm sure she'll handle it better than he did, that's basically impossible to handle worse, it still remains a tragic conclusion to a tale that ends positively for nearly everyone else. After the War of Heroes, Nyna doesn't return to Archanea. She's had enough heartbreak, enough suffering, enough pain. Instead, she vanishes, leaving the continent in Marv's hands and is never seen again. That can of course be interpreted in plenty of ways, from chasing after Camus and living her best polygamous life to vanishing being a euphemism for suicide here. But just looking at what we know, there's little reason to suggest Nyna lived a happy life following the events of the games. She remains cursed, she has very little combat prowess, grew up in a royal palace, there is no reason to suggest she would be able to survive on her own, and cannot have been in a sound state of mind after everything she went through, from seeing her parents hung on the gates of her own kingdom to the swift rejection of the man she loved. It's not the nicest headcanon to have, but knowing her story, I just cannot imagine her ending meaning anything other than a self-chosen death. And painful as that is, it is at the very least a decision of her own agency. When you know you are cursed to suffer, have already suffered so much, and the one thing that kept you going leaves for an entirely different continent, it is a painful, tragic, but understandable conclusion to come to. Then again, Nyna has shown a remarkable level of resilience throughout the entire story of Archanea, so maybe I'm underestimating her. For what it's worth, by the time we return to Archanea, now known as Elise, it is worth pointing out that there is blonde hair to be found in the royal family, courtesy of Emerin and Lissa. Now, a lot of time has passed, so there's absolutely no way to link this to Nyna whatsoever, but still. It leaves a sliver of hope that maybe one day Nyna returned to the throne that was rightly hers. The throne she vowed to protect the entire time, but she eventually abandoned for paths unknown. And while that is all not certain, I think I can say for certain that Nyna is one of Fire Emblem's most tragic characters of all time. She was not allowed to win even once. All she was subjected to was suffering, pain, and tragedy. What are your thoughts on Nyna? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on all my future Fire Emblem content coming up. For now, thanks for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.